welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you so much to so many of you for filling out that survey that we sent you. And we've had loads of responses. We had big response to people joining this thing. And we had a really big response. More than half of people have replied to the survey. So we know lots more about you and the context that you're in and what have you. Please do. We've got quite a lot to convey in only an hour. And so it's not going to be super interactive, but if you have any, like us and you, that is, but if you have any comments or questions, there's a question box, I believe, or just light up the chat box and chat among yourselves. If you have any comments that you want to make, if you want to just introduce yourself into the chat box and just say who you are and where you are. I know that there are people from all over the world joining us today. And please do feel free to communicate with one another. If either of us says anything that you think is interesting and you just want to make a note of it, stick that in the chat box and we will send you the chat file as well as the recording later on. And so this is really for all different types of people, for school leaders, head teachers, trust leaders, for heads of year, for pastoral leaders, for teachers, parents. There's some people outside of the school system who are interested in this thing as well. And so it's really for anybody who's just interested in improving how we're doing behavior in schools and beyond. And just to give you a very quick introduction to how this conversation came to be, Tara and I used to work together a number of years ago now for Pivotal Education, which is a behavior management organization that was led by Paul Dix, who many of you may be familiar with. He wrote probably one of the best-selling education books of all time, let alone just in terms of behavior. And Tara still works with Paul. And then our careers took us in slightly different directions over the last few years. And then Tara and I recently reconnected and we started talking about the work that she's been doing, which we're going to hear something of, about the psychology of mattering. And I was talking about my own work around implementation science and improvement science. And we could see immediately how, first of all, these two things dovetail really nicely. And also, they're often missing, like people aren't talking about these ideas in the context of school behavior or indeed more widely. And we think that they have a lot to offer. And I'm going to hand over Tara just to set the context a bit in terms of where we are, some common patterns that we see in terms of what happens in schools around behavior and relationships and attendance and what have you. And then we're going to dive into these two ideas and we'll share some, I think, really powerful, interesting, useful ideas with you. And then we'll have more opportunity to chat and interact towards the end of the hour. Over to you, Tara.
Thank you, James. Welcome, everyone. James, to paint the picture, I've got some information that is from gov.uk. I've got some information from TEDx. I've got some information that's some of it might be a bit anecdotal because I'm lucky enough to spend a lot of time in a lot of schools around the country and over the world through the work that I do. And some of the common patterns, and the reason that I want to paint this picture is I want you to go, oh, that one speaks of us or that one doesn't, and you can maybe see what you identify with. So, yeah, system level signs, it's that things are not well. So rise in suspension and internal removal, that's typically happening. The figures are 20% increase last year on suspensions and internal removals. We've also had attendance issues, particularly nationally, but it has gone down in the last year, but it's still quite high. 1 in 5 are persistently absent. The things that are reported around behaviour, staff exhaustion, so the impact on behaviour, therefore on teacher retention. There was a TES headline, a TS headline this week, teachers facing worse behaviour, more likely to quit, study finds. So there's some really strong and emotive feelings there for teachers and the impact on our workforce. There's also spiralling problems around mental health and well-being for both the students and staff. And then sort of school level, there was a really interesting piece written and reported by the Gov.uk last year, 2025. Do I know what year in? 7 minutes lost every 30 minutes to low-level disruption. That is a common used term, whilst I have some feelings about the term low-level disruption. But for ease of us all understanding what that means, we'll go with that. Inconsistency between classrooms. We've noticed and had reported that there can be calm corridors, but still fragile culture. Heavy reliance on sanctions, which some schools are finding really tricky. However, different settings. There are really different settings here today in this session. And also I work with very different settings. And whilst I'm thinking a lot of the things that are reported by gov.uk or TS, they are those sort of high tariff behaviours that we think of. But also for some of our independent schools or international settings, and I've got quite a lot of experience with that as well, there are different issues, no less issues, but there are still very significant issues around behaviour and perhaps staff feeling de-skilled in how to support in that. So there's some tension, right, all around this subject. Ongoing problems around student behaviours, as illustrated by how many of us wanted to join this webinar. We outgrew our room. We know that there are lots of people who are dedicated to making this better, who are well-meaning, experienced, and yet the problem persists. And that's what brought us together, questioning, discussing our research. There seems to be something missing. So we thought we would look at these core areas of our research, the two things that are important to us and what we do that we feel are largely missing from the behaviour conversation. And one is the psychology of mattering, which I'm going to talk about today. And the other is implementation science. James.
Yeah, we want to be really transparent and clear that this is early days for us. We're just starting to put these ideas together. I'm sure that many of you have downloaded. We wrote a free guide. First of all, we've done a couple of short podcasts where I interviewed Tara and then she returned the favor. And the ideas that we're sharing with you today, there is evidence for them, strong evidence in the research literature. And I think that there's lots of reasons for thinking that we should pursue these ideas. But we haven't yet worked directly with schools with this particular lens in mind. And so we're not here we can't point to case stories and case studies and say, look at this school who've been doing this stuff. It's really working well. We want to do that soon. And we have a plan to work with a small group of schools later this year, if people are interested. And we'll share more information about that towards the end of the call. But it's really just an opportunity to invite people into a space where we can explore these ideas. We're going to share some useful stuff today, but we're barely going to be able to scratch the surface because there's a lot here. So let's dive into these two sets of ideas then. First of all, the psychology of mattering, and I'll hand back over to Tara.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to explain what brings me to mattering. So I did as a psychologist, I did a positive psychology master's a few years ago. I wanted to look specifically at positive psychology because unlike traditional psychology, it doesn't focus on deficit. It looks at what's going and it looks at the science of how you cultivate more of that. It was vital to me that at the end of that 3-year journey, I was giving something back to teachers. So that was my main aim. And I've been delivering work to schools for over 10 years on behaviour, and I will deliver this today as I do with all my behaviour work. I'm going to assume everybody here in the room is absolutely child-centred, and I'm going to talk to you as somebody who is teacher-centred because teachers are my people, and I always think about that perspective. So my research was about teacher mattering. And so let me define what that is for you. Clearly, it is a psychology construct in two parts. I want to give you a brief overview of what mattering is. There's lots of exciting things coming out in it. It is quite common parlour at the moment. And then talk a little bit about, well, quite a lot about how we can make staff mattering and teacher mattering bring that to the fore in our schools and the effect, and a little bit on the student mattering in the time that we have got. So I'll do my best to hit a little bit of everything for you. So mattering, clearly defined, two-part construct, psychology construct. It's about feeling valued and adding value. So two parts, how valued you feel you are and how much you add value. Now, when I talk about this in teacher training, there is this wonderful moment where people start assessing themselves on those two things. I feel like I add loads of value, or maybe I'm not very valued, and all of that. So you might be doing that now, working out where you are on those scales of those two areas. For those of you who, like me, probably like a little bit of extra information, the first person to coin the phrase was Morris Rosenberg. So Rosenberg and mattering, they're synonymous. You'll see lots around him because a lot of his work as well is around adolescence and mattering, because he was really focused on how do we increase their sense of self-esteem and worth. That area, and I would say this researcher, if you wanted to look at more, that's a good place to start. Even though he was writing in the 80s, you get a great baseline. And he distinguishes the difference between mattering and self-esteem. Self-esteem is very much about how you evaluate yourself, whereas mattering is about how important you feel you are to others, how much you can add value, how much you are valued. And what it looks like matches the psychology of experiencing feeling significant. When you feel significant and valued and important to others and important to the world, you end up with a sense of you are noticed, so others will pay attention to you, you're important, you have value in others' lives, you are relied upon, others depend on you, and you would be missed if you were gone. So that's how it would show up in your experiences. In simple terms, mattering is the feeling that you count and you make a difference. And as I said, my area of research focused on staff mattering, teacher mattering. You have to have both present. You have to have both that sense of being valued and adding value. So let's think about staff mattering and behaviour. So staff in the school and their mattering and behaviour. I'm going to talk about experiencing mattering, the noticed and feeling valued and adding value, and what I'm going to call anti-mattering, so not experiencing, being those two things. What does it look like if we have mattering? It looks like your contributions in school are acknowledged. If you are experiencing antimatter in the school, it looks like contributions are not acknowledged. Your effort receives no feedback. Leadership rarely visits your classroom except for compliance checks. And I know visiting classrooms can be a bit contentious, right? So there has to be psychological safety within the culture for it to be a norm that people visit your classroom. Good work is treated as expected and therefore it's unnoticed. So that's in an anti-mattering experience. You feel replaceable. Decisions are made without any teacher input. That is going to strongly contribute to an anti-mattering experience. Teachers are told to implement policies without consultation, and messages emphasize roles over the people. So that's that kind of anyone can do this job. You're just kind of sentiment. And feeling like a burden. So when people are struggling with the behaviour, they're needing more support, then they might actually feel that they are adding to the harm. That means they hesitate asking for help, feeling guilty, requesting support, and believing that their struggles are an inconvenience. And if we're not able to talk about as a staff body how we are having difficulties, particularly around the business of behaviour, because for many teachers it can equate to competence as well. And if there isn't a culture of being able to talk about it, then that contributes to this sense of burden. Staff who are not having meaningful influence will be having an anti-mattering experience. And that might look like a sort of a token committee membership without a real voice, or that there is feedback requested of them, but it's never acted upon. School initiatives are imposed from a top-down level, or there can be emotional and behaviour outcomes from antimattering. So, if it persists, you might see emotional exhaustion. You might see effort, withdrawal from collaboration. So that can really help be disruptive to want to have consistency in your culture. It can also affect attendance of our staff. So we get increased absenteeism, we have a higher turnover. So over time, anti-mattering will contribute to the burnout and actually to quite a lot of identity erosion. And my research was qualitative, and that this was something that was really spoken about. And then you can have added intersection of gender in the teachers or race in their teacher experiences of anti-mattering. And that will start to contribute to some compliance issues, low relational trust, minimal recognition practices, high staff over, and that quiet disengagement rather than open conflict in our staff, that healthy conversation, just people withdrawing from the culture. So let's think about what it would look like to have mattering. Thinking now we've just gone through some of those anti-mattering experiences, you might be thinking or picturing or noticing that, oh, that reminds me of some of the behaviours of some members of staff. And perhaps this is quite a good opportunity to look at some of those positive disruptors, we could say, and maybe we could afford them a little bit of generosity of understanding what's happening for them. What's happening for that positive disruptor is resisting? What's their feeling of value in this conversation? Staff mattering. What does it look like? It's a voice in the policy formation, particularly around behaviour. It's trust in professional judgment. It's visible responses to the feedback that they give. When you get yourself involved in an inset day and you give lots of feedback and then nothing happens with that information. But actually, when we have it collated afterwards and action plans put towards what's happened from the staff feedback, then people feel a high sense of mattering. Specific acknowledgement is really important in experiences of mattering. So the experiences of teachers who feel mattering in a school involve perceiving that they are valued, that they are influential, that they are significant within the school community. So that means also there are relationships beyond their leadership team, but also with families as well, and people being drawn into that. And that's a really important part of that foundational work by Rosenberg. So this practice in school might look like where we put our attention as leaders, middle leaders, so that our staff feel that they are noticed, and not only noticed when things are going wrong. Teachers experience mattering when school leaders acknowledge their instructional efforts. When colleagues are recognised for their innovative lessons or extra effort. It's also about how students are able to express appreciation. So do we create opportunities for students to express appreciation for our staff or their engagement? It's about their contributions being publicly affirmed in meetings and in communication. So sometimes some participants in my research talked about having their strategies referenced during staff meetings, asking other teachers to mentor each other, so they were part of adding value to new strategy, and they just talked about how important it was to have opportunities for families and students to thank them for their support. They feel like they matter when their professional judgment is trusted, and that's a really important sort of exchange between senior leaders and teachers, because a lot of senior leaders who I coach say just wish they would act more independently or follow up behaviour issues themselves, and there can be a disconnect in how trusted they feel to take that extra step, how included they are in the decision, knowing that this action we're asking everyone to do consistently here, that feeds into this bigger picture of our attendance drive, or the bigger picture of our attainment. So understand what these small things mean and what their effect will be in terms of adding value wholesale. They like to know that their opinions shape the curriculum or shape the policy discussions, and that leadership treat them as professionals rather than just implementers. So what it looks like is being invited to those curriculum committees, having a voice in school improvement planning, and leadership seeking, this is really important, seeking their perspective before major changes. They want to feel relied upon. Okay? They are somehow depended upon in this. And that's an important part of mattering, that others can count on you. So being asked, as I said before, to mentor new teachers and being trusted to lead new initiatives, colleagues turning to them for guidance. And the reason I've used positive psychology and I pursued that is because it uses quite a lot of strength-based practice. So for us to turn to our colleagues for guidance, we need to know what their strengths are. And when we know what our team's strengths are, then that also says, I see you. I see you as the person who is best at dealing with a situation with humour. I see you for your excellent attention to detail. And then we are using those strengths to formulate our teams and have everybody contributing and working at their best. It's the emotional and psychological indicators that are important. When teachers feel that they matter, you will see higher motivation, greater job satisfaction, stronger commitment to the school, lower burnout, and that increased resilience. And when we think about the things that teachers are struggling with, they want to accommodate SEND, they want to be relational, they want to improve attainment, achievement, attendance, then actually to walk that extra mile for us, those things that maybe sit outside of policies where we need to think outside the box sometimes, improvise and work as a team, that can only happen when we have those high emotional and psychological indicators present, when we have cultivated a culture of mattering. Then we can have collaborative decision making, distributed leadership, regular recognition practices, relational trust between staff and leadership, and a culture of professional respect. And it starts to be a bit more leadership having that high positive regard for their staff. I want to, just in the last few minutes I've got, talk a bit about student mattering. Now, if you've been making notes, I'm sure you've been going, well, actually, it's the same, right? They need to be included. They need to have a voice. They need to not have a top down. They need to be able to experience. So that's why I'm just going to give it a slightly shorter amount of time for the webinar purposes. Student maths and behaviour. If we have anti-mattering in our student, or our management of our student that provokes and creates anti-mattering in them, it's the things like being sent out in a way that isn't very clearly framed and done in a supportive manner, being excluded, being ignored, not being thanked, not being appreciated, not being listened to, not feeling like you're heard. Positive examples of mattering are around praise. We can start to ask our students actually where they feel that they add value in school. Quite often when we think about student mattering, it looks at our opportunities. Schools often are very good at looking at opportunities where we can bestow the praise on our students. How do we show them they are important? How do we celebrate them in that way? And we might forget those really important moments where they get to add value. Where can you build in opportunities to add value? Never underestimate the power of value seen in being that year 2 scissor monitor and how much you are valued for being safe. Notice when you are doing things well. It's really important to just not think, well, they should know that, but actually put our attention to those moments and really using student voice. And just as I said with staff voice, you don't want to use student voice and then do nothing with that information. We want to use student voice and talk about what the outcome is of those conversations. So I'm just going to finish with maybe some questions that you might want to consider. Just a bit of a quick reflection point. I want you to think about maybe a pupil whose behaviour concerns you and where there might be opportunities for them to add value. Think about that imbalance and how the imbalance leads to the compromised well-being. Adding value without feeling valued for staff and students is burnout, or being valued without adding value makes you very passive. Just the taking of rewards, but not actually being able to contribute to the community. And belonging is an outcome of mattering. It's not the target itself. So this current Ofsted focus of belonging is chasing the wrong goal. Belonging runs downstream of mattering. If you chase belonging directly, you may miss the mechanism. If you build mattering, the belonging follows. And as we're going to swap over, I'm wondering, would you be happy for me, James, to just share a slide so that everyone can see what runs downstream of a culture of mattering? That you can see all the things that run downstream of mattering are things that are important to us. I think that when that anecdotally, and again, qualitative research, leaders are looking for resilience from their staff. Teachers are looking for resilience from their students. But leaders are looking for staff who will make decisions and take risks and show agency. We want more motivation in our students. Apathy comes up a lot, the apathy of youth. All of these things can become available to us if we support those opportunities for feeling valued and adding value. I'm going to stop there, James. I could go on, but I want to share our time.
Thank you very much. Every time I hear you speaking about this, Tara, I just like more and more pieces of this puzzle just unlock in my mind. And I was almost had whiplash from I was nodding so hard during the anti-mattering section. I think you should make an anti-mattering bingo card, because just so many of those things were ringing true. I'm sure that there would have been for many people on the call as well. Feedback being collected but just not acted upon. And you're talking about building like high trust environments, cultures, a highly inclusive culture in the broad sense of the word, that's including teachers in the process of running the school. And that dovetails really nicely into what I'm going to talk about now, which is to look at implementation and improvement science. And this was a bit of a sidebar in my career, really. I never intended to get into this stuff I was much more interested in learner effectiveness and what have you, and like holistic child development, the bits of education that lie beyond teaching people about subjects. But a few years ago, I stumbled upon an implementation conference and it just absolutely blew me away. And since then, whenever I talk about this stuff, I often start by asking this question. If you look back over your career, you don't have to just think about behavior stuff now. So thinking about any change initiative that you've seen implemented over the years, what proportion of those change initiatives, of those improvement initiatives, actually improve anything? And it's such an interesting question to ask because I won't do it now because we're short on time. But if I was to ask you, I'm almost guaranteed that the majority of responses would fall in around the 10 to 20% range. It's almost always what people say, first of all. And then if you really push people and you say, I'm talking about like demonstrable change, you've got evidence of improved outcomes, and you know what led to those improved outcomes. And those improved outcomes were sustained over several years, and they're still happening now. At that point, people often dial their estimate down to zero, or they maybe point to one or two things that they think were effective. And I can certainly think of many behavior initiatives that were implemented at schools I've worked in and with over the years that fall into that 90% of things that just did not make any discernible difference in terms of outcomes for kids or for teachers. And so this led me on a bit of an odyssey, and I started reading all of this stuff. And I wrote this book that came out about a year ago, Making Change Stick. And there's also an online program. There's like an implementation system for schools, makingchangestick.co, the website. And the book, both the book and the program, there are 4 phases to it. And there's a lot here. But I just want to just flash this up so that you can get a sense as to where the ideas that I'm going to share with you are coming from. So there's a rationale and overview section up in the top left here. Why is it that we need to be looking at this stuff? Then, as you can see, the program itself falls into three phases: make a start, make a plan, and make it happen. And I want to just zoom in and look at 3 of these things. Number 1, why is that figure so low? Why is it that so many change initiatives in schools don't actually turn the dial and improve outcomes? And then I want to look at 2 ideas. The big idea really that drives this whole program, this whole approach, is to use a slice team. And then secondly, I want to look at a thing called a root cause analysis, something that's widely used in other walks of life, but not really very widely used in education yet, but it really should be. It's a super helpful tool. First of all, why is that figure so low? I think that there are 2 big reasons. Number 1, we're just not taught this stuff. Teachers and school leaders are not taught about implementation and improvement science. And I know this partly because it used to be my job to deliver the NPQs, the old NPQs, the NPQs that the majority of existing school leaders went through. And then I was also part of the team that was tasked with writing a national program based on the new NPQ frameworks. And in the old NPQ frameworks, there was very little stuff on change management. There was a little bit of a mention of Michael Fullan, or whatever it may be, the stages of grief, that whole thing, Kubler-Ross change curve and what have you, but very thin on the ground. And now in the new NPQs, new being like they came about 5 years ago, didn't they? There is now a section, as you may be aware, this is for people in England and Wales, there's now a section on implementation, but whoever wrote those frameworks basically just almost word for word copy and pasted the EEF's implementation guidance, and they just bolted it onto the end of each of the frameworks. And there is some good stuff in the EEF guidance, but it's a very high level document. It's like a conceptual framework, really. It does not contain the sort of the granular tools and strategies that you need. And here are some examples of implementation strategies that I think are just like bread and butter issues that everybody should be super au fait with, which are not mentioned, or which maybe get 1 sentence in the EEF guidance. And I won't go through all of this, but these are basically ideas that appeared in that last slide. This is all in this program, and it's all in these ideas that we can bring to bear on this question of improving behavior and relationships in schools. And then the second big reason is that we default to top-down change. We almost always implement change in a top-down way, where a small number of people at the top of an organization call the shots, the school leaders, the NHS directors, the cabinet ministers, the business leaders, and what have you, and they tell everybody what's going to happen now. And there are a number of problems with that. First of all, it's like sometimes top-down change can be effective, but often it's not. When it's something really deep rooted, like in schools, like closing the disadvantage gap, like improving literacy outcomes, like improving behavior, the kinds of things that appear on school improvement plans from one year to the next, and they never really get solved. Looking more widely, we might look at social care or climate change or life expectancies going down for the first time in decades. These big, deep-rooted questions, very clearly, the people at the top of our organizations do not have the answers to those problems, to those challenges. And there are a number of issues here. One of them is black box leadership, that as well as it being top down, it's also done in a closed room behind closed doors. And the rest of the school community is not included, to go back to what Tara was talking about, in the process of formulating these policies. Sometimes people are, but often that's not the case. And that speaks to something about human nature, which is that people just fundamentally, often they don't really like being told what to do. Even when it's a good idea, there's just something that's almost like a bit of an adolescent sort of behavior strain that runs through the population. People just want to feel like they have a small amount of say over what they do and when and how. And they just don't like doing what somebody else has told them to do. So it's this top-down thing goes against the human nature in quite a fundamental way. And it can often lead to this sort of like an us and them culture in schools, where the senior team is almost seen as like an adversarial role with the rest of the school staff. And that runs both ways. People saying, oh, those senior leaders, they don't know what it's like. They've forgotten what it's like to have big piles of marking and so on. And the senior leaders are saying, why are they coming to me with all these problems? They need to be dealing with this themselves. And you often get this sort of us and them dynamic. Or at best, you get like a compliance mindset where people will look busy for that high stakes observation lesson or whatever. When somebody walks past with a clipboard, there's a sense of compliance. But as soon as the door's closed, people revert to type. And groupthink is perhaps the mother of all problems with top-down change. When you get a small number of people making decisions, even if those people are brilliant, qualified, highly intelligent, you often get bad decisions, not because they're bad people or because they're not capable. It's just that they are not the Senko. They are not that year 5 child with dyslexia who's caring for his mum. They're not that early career teacher who's feeling super overwhelmed. They're not able to look at the problem through all these multiple lenses because they are all like-minded. They're all highly accomplished school leaders, right? And so you get all of these related, interconnected problems with top-down change. And I think that's a huge part of why we see these problems in schools, why we see change initiatives not actually improving things. And so to actually improve outcomes, first of all, the slice team is such a powerful way of changing that dynamic. So instead of having all of the decisions made in this top-down way, you take a slice, a cross-sectional slice through the school community. It could include some or all or most of the people that you see on the screen. Certainly in relation to something like behavior, literally there's nobody in the school community that's not affected by that issue. Either you want site staff, you want to have your lunchtime supervisors in a slice team, everybody really. And if you're in a primary school, it's a good idea to get a range of different ages and phases included. If you're in a secondary school, you ideally want to get as many subjects or faculties in your slice team as possible. And there are a few different ways to use a slice team. The least time consuming is just to have a one-off consultation. If time's really tight, just assemble a slice team, get them to sit around a table for an hour or two and talk about behavior through each of their different lenses, and you will learn a huge amount. But it is only a one-off consultation, and that's like the shallow end, if you like. Then in the middle, we have a steering group where maybe the behavior policy is being driven by a senior leader or two, but then they check in with the slice team, maybe every term or every half term, for some support and feedback and maybe some accountability. And then the third version is like the full fat version, if you like, when you have a working party where the slice team is really the executive and they're making all the key decisions. And I think with regard to school behavior, there's a very strong case for having a working party, a cross-sectional working party looking at this in an ongoing way, because so often that top-down model, it's like we've written this policy and we've told everybody. We did a launch in September and we spent a whole day on it looking at different scenarios, and now people just aren't actually implementing the policy. Somebody submitted a question via the survey saying exactly that. The staff were involved in writing the policy and now they're not actually implementing it. What's going on? And I think it's partly because it's hard to turn the dial on human behavior, but again, it turns back into that top-down thing. You now need to follow the policy, and the expectation is that policy is going to be the best way to meet every situation that we might encounter through the year. And that's just not the case. Like, schools are dynamic, complex places, things change, and you need to be checking in with that slice team and saying, what's it like in the languages corridor? Are there any bit points in the week where there's a bit of a hot spot and there's a number of kids being sent out of lessons and there's things going on in the corridor? What's it like in the canteen queue? What are the parents saying at the school gates? We need to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in an ongoing way. And the idea, instead of a black box, the slice team works as a glass box in a transparent way so people can see in. So the slice team publishes the minutes of their meetings, for example. You can invite people to come and observe meetings. And also we can see out, so we collect data in an ongoing way as to how this is playing out across the school and across time. It's a good idea to invite applications for people to join your slice team. You don't just want to be preaching to the converted. So you want those keen beans to be involved, the people who are really into this and who have got lots of energy and enthusiasm. And you also want people who are a bit resistant or perhaps a bit skeptical, so that you're really getting the full breadth of views included in the decision-making process. And you come up with a set of ground rules to make sure that the slice team does not themselves suddenly fall into groupthink. And I won't go through all of these now, but I just wanted to flash this up so that you can maybe take a screen grab or a photograph of it. But these are very effective ground rules that help these slice teams to work in a really effective way. And one thing that's really helpful is to do a thing called 5-minute interviews, where each member of the slice team, you come up with a bunch of questions. Let's say you've developed a new behavior policy, you come up with some new rules or whatever, a new recording procedure, and you might say, what do you think about this behavior policy? Do you agree that this is a priority for the school at this point in time? What questions do you have? What concerns or ideas do you have? And then each member of the slice team goes away and talks to other people like them. So the teaching assistant goes and talks to 3 or 4 other teaching assistants, middle leaders likewise. And then the next time the slice team meets, they feed that information back in an anonymized way. So they're not just saying, oh, Tara thinks this is a terrible idea. They're saying, oh, people are concerned about this aspect of what we're doing. And the person of the slice team member can roll in their own views with this anonymized feedback that they're sharing. And so you get this really strong sense of what the school is really thinking about this issue. And you just have radical transparency and a very safe mechanism through which people can have this very honest, let's look under every rock, warts and all type conversation. And so you can see here, this is very squarely addressing the phenomenon that Tara was talking about, bringing people into the conversation, making them feel valued and included and listened to and respected, and like their views are contributing to whole school decision making. And in my experience, and I've been working with lots of schools now over the last few years, there are 2 big things that happen when you work in this way. Number one, you get much better decision making because you're looking at it through all of these different lenses. And secondly, you get buy-in, like people come with you on the journey because they can see that they are represented on that slice team, that this isn't just the usual top-down dynamic, that there is somebody like them. There's an early career teacher on this team. I'm having my views represented, and there's somebody with whom I can interact throughout the process. And so people come with you on the journey, and you unleash all of this goodwill, what John Hattie calls like collective efficacy. People come with you on the journey, and they're much more likely to make good decisions at the point of need when they feel trusted and respected in that way. So that's number one, is slice teams. And the second thing I'd like to share with you briefly is this idea of a root cause analysis. And there's a few different ways that you can do a root cause analysis. One of them is this idea of the thing called the problem tree, where the metaphor really describes itself, where you have an issue, like a problem that you want to address or an area that you would like to develop. And that's the trunk of the tree. And then we've got the consequences of that problem, and that's the branches of the tree and the leaves. And then we've got the root causes, and the roots are the roots, right? And so, for example, at the moment, there's this statistic doing the rounds. The government published this about summer last year, I think. Roughly 7 minutes out of every 30, it is estimated or has been calculated, are lost to low-level disruption, due to what the government described as kids kicking off. It's so interesting listening to what Tara was saying, because so much of the conversation about behavior. It like locates the problem in the child, doesn't it? The kids are kicking off, or the teacher retention is a nightmare because of behavior. Kids are driving teachers out of the classroom. And it's all about locating the problem in the child, isn't it? But what Tara's talking about is when the staff feel that they matter, that they're included, you change the whole dynamic of that school. You've changed the culture in which student behavior takes place. And it's just such a smart way of looking at this through the lens of staff mattering, I think. So anyway, so this low-level disruption thing is the trunk of our tree. What are the consequences of this? Already we can see there's lost learning time. That's going to affect student attainment. There's this cycle of escalation where like kids are escalating, perhaps the teachers are escalating to get the kid up the sanction ladder so they can get them out of that classroom and get on with teaching their lesson. There's a sort of peer norm thing that happens where the kids are like, oh, this is how we behave here. So what you tolerate is what you come to expect, right? And so that can start to take root. There's damage to relationships when this is happening. There's lots of consequences. You can see I've gone to the other side of the tree here. There's lots of sanctions that the teacher's having to deal with, detentions and what have you, removals. There's a cognitive load aspect to this. The teacher just wants to teach the lesson that they've planned, and they're having to stop and think about the fact that somebody's got their phone out, or that they're chatting or something, or carving their name into the desk, whatever it might be. Teacher workload, stress, burnout. There was a TESS article this week that said that teacher retention is a lot worse in schools with lots of behavior problems, which doesn't come as any surprise, of course, but it's sometimes research just needs to state the obvious, doesn't it? And then, so what's going on here? What is the problem? Why is it that there's so much time being lost to low-level disruption? Well, there's loads of reasons, and we can look at the roots. I often like to use these 6 categories. Comes from my work around learner effectiveness and self-regulated learning. The root causes as to why that's happening, there's loads of them, right? It could be that the children are tired and hungry. It could be that they're dehydrated and just cranky and they don't even know it. Perhaps they had a can of Monster on the way into school for breakfast and their blood sugar takes a slump at about 10:30 in the morning. It might be, as we can see in emotional here, it might be fundamentally a sense of not mattering. It might be a sense of perceived injustice. Sir, that's not fair. You treat me differently to how you treat other people. It might be that a cognitive thing. It might be that the work is too hard and the kids are lost, or it could be too easy and they're bored. There's loads of different reasons, as you can see here. And therefore, on the right-hand side of this slide, there are loads of different things that we could do to address low-level disruption. And then the question is, which of those things should we be doing if we're going to address low-level disruption? And the answer is you can't know. You can't know how to tackle that problem unless you've done this root cause analysis, unless you go through a process of working with a SCISE team, working with young people, with parents, with governors, with site staff, and trying to figure out what is going on. Why is it that these particular issues are happening? And then you can start to build an improvement strategy. And it's probably a combination of things. The root causes will be a combination of things in different classes, in different year groups. And so therefore, the strategy for dealing with low-level disruption in year 10 might be different to being in year 7 and year 13 or what have you. So the root cause analysis is an absolute no-brainer, I think. You're only hiding to nothing if you don't do that level of analysis. So we've got just a few minutes to wrap up, and I really want to have some time for questions. If people have any questions or comments, please stick them in the chat. I just want to share one more thing before we open this up. This program, I'm not even sure that we should call it a program. It's like we've put together this 6 sessions over the next 3 terms. You can see the dates here. There's two in each of the, like summer term 1, summer term 2, and then 2 after the summer as well. 3 of them are in person, and it's going to be in central London. We'll try to spread this around. We might be running one of these in Wales possibly as well. We've had lots of interest in this. And each one is on a Friday, the in-person ones, and that'll be followed by a social, because it's nice to hang out a bit, isn't it? And to just connect in a human way to improve our sense of mattering. And we're going to do all of this stuff on the right-hand side. Of course, we're going to get really into the weeds in terms of mattering. How can we build a culture in which every child and adult feels safe and seen and significant? We're going to go through that process of doing a root cause analysis to figure out what's going on in your context, help you to refine and tweak your policy, but also recognizing that a policy is just that. It's just a document, and that's not enough to implement the change that you want to see. exploring practical tools like slice teams, like tight but loose planning, like how to collect and analyze and act on data, recognizing consistent routines, looking at habit change is an absolutely massive part of this. How people habitually behave is basically like that's the water that we're swimming in here. And how to support leaders to create the conditions where people feel empowered and valued and involved in the school life. They don't just feel like it's being done to them in such a way that they feel that they matter, and they're therefore going to behave in much more healthy, proactive, pro-social ways that are rooted in human connection and warmth, rather than this sort of cold, clinical, like top-down, you didn't implement the behavior policy, so you're a naughty teacher, you're a naughty kid. This kind of dynamic that we see so much of in our schools. Okay. Yes. And if you haven't done, the final thing, if you haven't done yet, if you haven't seen the little document that we published, which has got goes into a little bit more depth around some of the different implementation tools, if you drop us a line or if you scan that code, I think that you will be sent a copy of that. The early bird, there is an early bird thing which expires this Friday, although we could probably do a bit of an extension to that because quite soon some people need to clear the budget with the boss and so on. And also you can pay like after April if the financial year is an issue, people can pay later, and so it goes into the next financial year. It includes a subscription to the Making Change Stick program, so you get all of that online stuff, all of these resources. Yes. So does anybody have any questions? Did anybody asked any questions? There was one there from Gareth Tara.
Yeah, we put a bit of information to Gareth Payne's question around adding more staff and student mattering. And I've given a sort of a starting answer. I really think that you have to bring together both the Tara and James approach to be able to do this. So when I look at the work on that root cause analysis, I mean, it just throws any idea of there being a toolkit, a one thing fits all, it blows it out of the window. We've got to know where you're starting and where your staff's experience of mattering is. Some people on this line are going to have staff who have really high sense of mattering, and therefore they're just looking at how to tweak and bring staff along with them and be an adaptive leader. Some of us might be at a really different level where we're going, right, let's tell me what your experience is. Where do you feel valued? Where are you adding value? Why? Let me understand why you don't feel valued. And you're just going there, root cause analysis, and understanding what that baseline is. From there, particularly when we do rebooting behaviour, we will then be looking at, right, what are the next steps from that point? How do we speak to that feedback that you get from staff? If you ask them that question, the most important thing is that you are acting on the feedback that they give you. So I've been doing some work with Brighton and Hove head teachers on how to be an adaptive leader using this mattering work. And that is what, if they want to bring people alongside them, they're starting with cultivating mattering, making sure people belong. And then we're going, right, we can talk about the issues that affect our emotional intelligence. We can talk about the issues that are impacting our mattering. We can build more psychological safety, and that is helping to bring our staff and our teams alongside with us. That culture of trust, of having open conversations when we get it wrong, and that not be a worrying thing in a profession with so much high accountability.
Indeed. Yes.
So 1 minute under the end.
Yeah, for the first time in the history of webinars, we're going to finish. It'll probably be bang on the minute by the time there it goes. We're bang on 5:30. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us. I hope that you found that useful. I really think that we're onto something with this. We've had such an overwhelming response to this webinar, and since we just put out a small amount of stuff about this over the last few weeks. It really feels like these ideas are what is needed to start to turn the corner on this very challenging aspect of all of our lives. And it would be so lovely, wouldn't it? Like the nirvana that awaits if teachers can just get on with teaching and just not have to worry about this stuff because people feel connected and included and valued. It would be wonderful, wouldn't it? And it's
There's
absolutely
some
doable.
lovely
If you,
goodbyes and thank yous happening in the chat, James, as well. Lots of people
oh,
saying
that's nice.
find it interesting. There's skills for life. Thank you. And we've got lots of people saying they're finding it really interesting as well. They'd like a link to the Rethinking Behaviour, so we can send that out when we send the video as well.
Yeah, we'll send that out.
Anna, thank you very much. And Sharon and Courtney, lovely.
Great
Thank you
stuff.
so much. Lots of people are heading out, but thank you for your time.
Yes, thanks everybody. We'll be in touch soon. All the best.
Thank you, Leanne. Bye, Mark. Thank you.
Take care.